A good morning to one and all, and good evening, a very late good evening to Mimra in DC. And I'm really grateful on behalf of the MITI Institute of International Studies that you could join us at this unearthly hours. And we're really thankful for that. And um, to start the event with, as I was speaking to Mimra earlier, this is a part of the AIIS Neighborhood Lecture Series, a lecture series that we started with the very idea of, assessing and trying to make sense of the neighborhood from the eyes of the neighborhood. We, in Delhi, we hear a lot of us talking about the neighborhood from India's perspective, and also from Western scholars who talk about the neighborhood. But I think there is a deficit in terms of understanding what the neighborhood and what the neighboring countries, both the maritime neighbors as well as the land neighbors, think of the neighborhood. How do they perceive the neighborhood? And from that, trying to make some sense of how do we align these perceptions of the neighborhood? Do we all perceive the same neighborhood, or do we see the neighborhood in different ways? And I think that not only will lead to some academic reframing of how we see the neighborhood, but also, at the end, try and give some policy inputs as to how India should reframe and reorient its so-called neighborhood first policy. Without any further ado, for the benefit of the student community and my colleagues who have joined here, Mimra Ghafoor was a speechwriter to the president of the 76th session of the General Assembly, His Excellency Abdullah Sahid. Previously, Mimra worked at the President's Office of the Republic of Maldives, where he served as an assistant director in the Foreign Relations section, Communications section, and in the Office of the National Security Advisor. While at the President's Office, Mimra also assisted in drafting English statements and speeches for the President and Vice President. Previously, Mimra had worked in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a Foreign Service officer. Prior to that, he worked at Transparency Maldives, the local chapter of Transparency International, where he was a project officer and subsequently research coordinator working on projects relevant to judicial reform and strengthening the country's independent anti-corruption agency, respectively. Mimra holds a Master's in Arts and International Relations for the University of St. Andrews, Scotland. Dear students and my colleagues, will have Mimra speaking for roughly around 30 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor for question and answer in the next remaining 30 minutes. So the virtual floor is yours, Mimra. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Monish, for that very kind introduction, and for Professor Nagalaxmi for all the kind invitation. I would also like to just thank Amity University for giving me this platform, which is sort of a personal milestone for me because I've never really been invited to give a lecture. So it's quite an honor. Dr. Monish, he's covered my background quite well. Just before I proceed, I'd like to add the caveat that I'm no longer working in the Maldives government, and I speak in an individual capacity as I approach this topic. So they don't represent any institution or government. They're entirely my own. So with that out of the way, let's proceed. So when we talk about leveraging India-Maldives ties in the Indo-Pacific era, let me actually share my screen. Just for the sake of, yeah. Yeah, when we talk about the Indo-Pacific era, it really presupposes two things: that the Indo-Pacific is first a relevant concept, and that it's something that can be applied in the contemporary context. And it's worth exploring why this idea has utility beyond the formerly more in vogue term, the Asia Pacific. So the basic premise behind the Indo-Pacific is that the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean have such strong commercial and strategic linkages that they should really be combined into a single strategic theater. There's a historical argument for it, whether you're talking about Zhang Zi's famous voyage to the Indian Ocean in the 16th century, or even further back when India's Kola Empire expanded into Vietnam, Cambodia. But in the contemporary context, it's really geopolitical and has to do with great power competition. And it has very much to do with the rise of China, how states are responding to that new geopolitical reality. It's an idea that has very slowly crystallized and replaced as I said, the more fashionable the more previously fashionable Asia Pacific nomenclature. Whether you're talking about Shinzo Abe's famous speech to India's parliament in 2007, where he talked about the confluence of two seas, or Australia's defense white paper in 2011, which was really the first formal document that outlined the Indo-Pacific as a relevant and perhaps the most relevant strategic theater. And it's a concept that's been embraced by the US as well. Now, under both the Trump and then the Biden administrations, they've both articulated their visions of a free and open Indo-Pacific. And in 2018, the US military actually renamed their military command in Honolulu, Hawaii, formerly called the Pacific Command, as the Indo-Pacific Command, integrating the two regions into a single strategic theater. India formally embraced this concept when Prime Minister Modi, he gave his speech at the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018 in June, I believe. Previously, it's a concept that India had been pretty reticent to embrace because, New Delhi has always had a very strong non-alignment intellectual tradition in its foreign policy, dating all the way back to Jawaharlal Nehru, and the Indo-Pacific, as it stands today, is very much preoccupied with responding to China's rise. And if you look at the Prime Minister's speech or read it, he emphasized that he certainly didn't want India to be part of a containment strategy against China. Be that as it may, I don't think that wish has been fulfilled, really, because India is very much now part of a containment strategy against China. It's just geopolitics in motion. So this gives an indication of just how vast this theater is. It's become the geopolitical center of gravity by sheer virtue of its size, the amount of commercial networks, the choke points and access points. For instance, the Straits of Malacca is it's the choke point through which China gets most of its oil supply, and it is, well, I'm sorry, just to backtrack here, it's a bit late. When you talk about the Indo-Pacific region, you have to realize that the states that have really embraced this concept, they have different preoccupations in this region. For instance, the US has always been more preoccupied with the Pacific region. China, the Indian Ocean is as important as it is. It's still a secondary theater of concern. Their primary interests really lie in the South and East China Seas. It's to India that the Indian Ocean region has such a strong strategic element. And it's also worth highlighting that one of the reasons that the Indo-Pacific came to replace the Asia-Pacific concept is because of the growing geopolitical salience of the Indian Ocean and of the growing strategic profile of India specifically. The Indian Ocean today is, it's host to 2/3 of global maritime trade, and it's also the site of two interlocking rivalries. The rivalry between China and the United States, and also increasingly between China and India. China and India have always had fairly fraught relations, especially since 1962 when they fought their border war near the line of actual control in the Himalayas. And in recent years, there's been an added maritime dimension to this rivalry. And that really has to do with the fact that since 2008, China has been building up its Indian Ocean profile. Initially, they entered the Indian Ocean as part of an international task force. I believe the relevant UN SC resolution was 1851, which created an international task force to combat piracy off the Gulf of Aden. But even after the piracy threat abated, China did not withdraw from the Indian Ocean region. In fact, they found new strategic imperatives to keep expanding and deepening their presence. And that really boils down to two geopolitical factors. The one is their so-called Malacca dilemma. So if we go back to this map here, as I mentioned, this little choke point here, that's the access point through which China's like 80% of its supply of oil going from the Gulf enters the mainland. So any power that shuts off access to Malacca really has the power to completely upend China's economy with all the implications that would entail. So they've been expanding in the Indian Ocean to both guard access routes to Malacca Straits and to guard the sea lanes of communication that transport their oil shipments down that route. And secondly, it really has to do with a personal initiative of President Xi Jinping. It's his Belt and Road Initiative, which is his signature foreign policy. He announced in Kazakhstan in 2013, I believe. And the Belt and Road Initiative, it's essentially a series of massive infrastructure and connectivity projects that are meant to link Eurasia and Africa. And these two factors are driving China to not only increase their presence in the Indian Ocean, it's also leading, the flag to follow commerce, as the saying goes. For instance, they've now since 2017 they've established a logistics base in Djibouti, which is not exactly a military base, but it's not exactly civilian either. And they've also been increasing their engagement with the Indian Ocean's island nations, such as Sri Lanka and the Maldives. And this really creates quite an unhappy situation for India, because for one thing, China's Belt and Road Initiative enlists Pakistan as a major commercial partner, and Gwadar port, it's one of the signature elements of China's the China-Pakistan economic corridor. And in addition to that, as I mentioned, China has also been strengthening its linkages with island nations such as Sri Lanka and the Maldives, which are very much in have long been perceived as part of India's backyard. And India certainly does not appreciate China's growing military capacity in this region, and there's a worry that the Belt and Road Initiative is really being used to mask military designs. Like one particularly infamous example would be Hambantota port, which Sri Lanka has been leasing to the Chinese for a period of 9 years after they failed to meet their debt obligations. And India is worried that in that same vein, China can trap countries such as the Maldives and enlisted into a kind of debt trap where after we fail to honor our debt commitments, they'll swoop in a debt for equity swap and then use the infrastructure projects that they built in these regions to project power. It's a contested narrative, but nonetheless, it's one that's taken very seriously in India, and they're worried that the Maldives is becoming a sort of a pearl in the string of pearls that China is metaphorically building around the Indian Ocean region. So with that context out of the way, or rather I should say that context has really been superimposed into present India-Maldives relations. And it's added a layer of geopolitical complexity to a region that used to be fairly straightforward. For decades, it was just taken for granted that the Maldives was part of India's backyard, or that we would have amicable relationships bilaterally indefinitely. And there's a lot of compelling reasons why people would have thought that. We have long-standing social cultural languages. Our language, Divehi, derives from the Indo-Aryan family of languages, and there's actually a community in India, in Menakoi, that speaks Divehi. So it's not a language that's alien to the continent. So even though we formally established diplomatic relations in 1965, shortly after the Maldives won our independence, India was in fact the first country to recognize our independence. Establish formal ties with us. And there's also large communities of Maldivians living, studying and working in India. My mother-in-law is actually seeking medical treatment in New Delhi as I speak. And in turn, the Maldives welcomes a lot of Indian expatriates who work in various sectors in teaching and medicine and in tourism. And Maldives is also, as a small island state with not a lot of land for agriculture, we're an import-dependent country. So India has long been a source of raw materials for us, and an economic benefactor. And perhaps most significantly, India has also been a traditional first responder whenever the Maldives has been confronted with emergencies. The Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004, which devastated the Maldives economy in India, was at the forefront of relief efforts. Similarly, during 2014, when the capital confronted a water crisis where this water tanker gave out, so leaving a lot of us without access to drinking water. It was in India that shipped water to us and alleviated conditions. And recently, during COVID-19 as well, India was a great provider of vaccines. And we also enjoy common membership of regional associations, SARC, Indian Ocean Rim Association, and India has also supported a lot of development projects in Maldives. For instance, the main hospital in Malé, the Indira Gandhi Memorial Hospital, that was built with Indian financing, and we've long incorporated in the maritime sphere. For instance, the Dosti exercises, there exercises done between our two coast guards. 1988 was a milestone year for our relations, because that was an year in which Maldivian, a few Maldivian dissidents, with the help of the People's Liberation Organization of Tamil Eelam, they attempted to overthrow the then government of President Maumoon Abdul Gayoom. We requested a lot of countries to come to our assistance, including the United Kingdom, the US, but it was India that actually sent in troops and thwarted that attempt. If my memory serves me correctly, that's also the year in which Rajiv Gandhi, he sent the peace keeping forces into Sri Lanka during the Civil War. That was more ill-fated, whereas the intervention in Maldives was sort of happier. It didn't carry the same tragic consequences. And it engendered a lot of goodwill on the part of Maldivians towards India. So maybe moving up to the present day, or recent history. Maldives, we became a democracy in 2008. Mohammed Nasheed, he became our first democratically elected president. He defeated President Maumoon Abdul Gayoom, who been our president since 1978, for a period of 30 years. But whatever their political differences of opinion, in terms of foreign policy, Nasheed kept our positive outlook towards India. However, as I mentioned, while the amicability of our relations had been taken for granted for a long time, this started to perhaps not be the case towards the tail end of the Nasheed administration. And there's a few reasons for this. There's our politics have been fairly volatile since 2012 onwards, for reasons I'll explain. And there's been a lot of demagoguery that's been used as maybe a political vehicle to gain a power on the part of certain political factions in Maldives at India's expense. And also the fact that this turbulence really coincided with China's increasing engagement with the Indian Ocean. And this confluence of factors had detrimental impacts on the Maldives-India relationship. So, as I mentioned, this is Mohammed Nasheed. I saw him yesterday. He does not have as much hair. He was a former political rights activist who, as I mentioned, became our first democratically elected president in 2008. He inaugurated an India first foreign policy, very much based on the factors that I just mentioned, about India always being a historic first responder and just by virtue of geographic proximity. But his administration, unfortunately, did not have a pleasant ending. He, towards the end of 2011, domestic discontent had started to escalate towards his administration, and the opposition back then consisted of people who were very much affiliated with the former administration of Maumoon Abdul Gayoom. Perhaps the first real factor that started to rock bilateral relations was the opposition seized upon the fact that Nasheed, he contracted out development of Maldives International Airport in the island of Hurule to an Indian conglomerate called GMR. And the opposition at the time, they claimed that giving India this project would really jeopardize the Maldives sovereignty because of the amount of funding involved. I'm sorry, I don't actually have the figures, but beyond that, it was mostly a cynical play to rile up demagoguery against his administration. And for that and a number of factors, his administration was overthrown in 2012 after a police mutiny. He was his vice president, Dr. Wahid Hassan Manik. He then took over the reins of government. New Delhi made a calculation to very quickly recognize Dr. Wahid's government, but it didn't really do New Delhi any favors because not only did he cancel the GMR deal, he gave the contract, developed the airport to a Chinese company, and also during his administration, there was an arrest warrant issued for Nasheed on charges that he abused power while he was in office because he arrested a criminal court judge. Excuse me. Yeah, he arrested the Chief Justice of the criminal court for because he accused him of corruption. Anyway, Nasheed fled this arrest warrant by fleeing into the Indian embassy. And that created some tension because obviously, like it's a violation of diplomatic immunity for our security services to just storm the embassy. And to his credit, why he did not do that. But nonetheless, Wahid served out the remainder of Nasheed's term in the capacity as his former vice president. We held competitive elections in 2013, and Yamin Abdul Gayoom, the half brother of Mamun Abdul Gayoom, he came to power after a delayed election, and he won a very close contest against Mohammed Nasheed, nonetheless, who he defeated. That's him right there. To his credit, Yamin initially attempted to restore good relations with India, and he nominally continued in India for foreign policy. India was his first choice of visit in January 2014 after he became president. But be that as it may, he really opted for China as the Maldives' major infrastructure partner. He during a state visit by Xi Jinping in 2014, he signed up for China's Belt and Road Initiative, and subsequently, China and Maldives began cooperating on a number of giant infrastructure projects. His signature project was a project connecting the capital Male with the nearby island of Hulu Male and also the international airport in Hulule. And in addition to that, he also tried to attempt to enter into a free trade agreement with China. And he tried to enter it in quite a strange way because he essentially had the bill introduced into Parliament on a very accelerated timeline, and he essentially gave the Parliament essentially 2 minutes to look over and scrutinize the provisions of the bill before it was passed. It wasn't ratified, but the sheer zeal with which he tried to ratify it, it's telling just how strong a leverage that Beijing enjoyed over his administration. He also tried to enact a constitutional amendment to the Maldives Constitution where foreign parties could buy land in Maldives if they invested $1 billion and they reclaim most of the land. And a lot of his critics pointed out that only China had the funding to really be able to afford investment of such a large scale. That's the bridge that I was talking about. It's the China-Maldives Friendship Bridge. It's operational now. So before I proceed, I'd also like to point out that the debts that Yamin accumulated towards China, that they were quite inordinate. Towards the end of his administration, the Maldives owed about $1 billion US in debt to China, and given that our economy, like our GDP is $5 billion, that amounts to almost 1/5 of our GDP. Yamin also faced turbulent administration, especially towards the tail end, because he really tried to consolidate his hold on power after he won the elections. He intimidated and arrested a lot of his political opposition. He had Nasheed arrested on terrorism charges, and he was sentenced to in 2015. And around this time, Prime Minister Modi, he had actually been planning on visiting the Maldives as part of his neighborhood engagement. He visited Sri Lanka, and he was about to visit the Maldives, but the unrest created after Nasheed's arrest that prevented that. Yamin also preferred to continue cooperation with China because unlike perhaps the Western powers, they were not so critical of the democratic backsliding that marred his administration. He also was another aspect of his administration that really was a big element of his administration was corruption. A lot of the deals that he made with China involved large sums of money that were subsequently laundered, and then some of it was taken on for personal financial benefit, whereas the rest was used to support his political campaigns. Towards the end of his administration, there was also a bizarre episode in which our former tourism minister, Ahmed Adib, he'd actually become such a powerful figure. He'd used his position in his tourism portfolio to distribute money and graft to support his political ambitions, eventually at the point where he became vice president. He was made vice president in, I believe it was 2016. And he was ousted as vice president after Yamin actually accused him of trying to orchestrate an assassination attempt against him, if you can believe that. While Yamin was traveling to the Maldives on a launch, Ahmed Adib is currently in prison, and he was very much a part of the graft that really characterized the Yamin administration. Things also got very rocky towards in 2018. In February 12th, our Supreme Court actually issued a court order ordering Yamin to release all political prisoners, including Mohammed Nasheed, who, by the way, he'd actually been allowed to go to UK to seek medical treatment. So he wasn't in the country at this time, but he was technically under a conviction on terrorism charges. After that, Yamin didn't necessarily feel that his political footing was very stable. So he, as is the want of a lot of Maldivian politicians, they tend to appeal to nationalism to maybe give ballast to their political credibility. So he really took on an anti-India stance. For instance, he ordered out two Dhruv helicopters that India had gifted to us. And they're used for search and rescue and relief operations. Yamin took exception to the fact that they were operated by Indian personnel, which he claimed was a violation of the Maldives sovereignty. But in sum, his administration can fairly be characterized as one that was oriented more towards Beijing and was less friendly towards India. But as things turn out, he did not manage to retain office in the 28 elections, which saw Ibrahim Mohammed Salih of the Maldives Democratic Party come to power. So a point about Ibrahim Salih, he is a friend and ally of Mohammed Nasheed, and Nasheed himself had not been able to contest the elections because of the aforementioned a terrorism charge. And Salih, who really committed to orient the Maldives and its more a traditional India first trajectory. So as opposed to Yamin, who maintained a nominal India first foreign policy, Salih, who committed to maintain it in substance as well, and he wanted it to mirror in Narendra Modi's neighborhood first foreign policy. And he also opted to not ratify the free trade agreement that his predecessor had signed with Beijing, and he pledged to scrutinize the trade deals that Beijing had signed with the Yamin administration. So especially during the early phases of his administration, it was very much a win for India and a loss for China under this narrative. And to India's credit, has very actively made use of this period to strengthen ties. So Modi was not only present at the President Salih's inauguration, he also chose the Maldives as his first visit in 2019 after he won re-election in 2019. And he also addressed Maldives Parliament during his visit. India was also has also been very financially generous to the Maldives under this administration. Immediately after Salih came to power, India pledged a lot of budgetary and financial support to help the Maldives manage the debt that it has had accumulated as a result of its engagements with China. And it's also, New Delhi has also very much tried to increase its profile as an infrastructural partner. For instance, the Greater Mali Connectivity Project, it sort of aims to one-up the Sino-Mali Friendship Bridge by connecting all the islands in the administrative region in the capital, including Vilingili, Male, Hulu Male, etc. And India was also a strong supporter of the Maldives candidature for the presidency of the 76th session of the General Assembly. And after 2020, India was really at the forefront of providing the Maldives with vaccines through their Covishield and Vaccine Maitri program. They provided us a total of 200,000 vaccines, which was really vital for us to be able to manage the caseload. Now, excuse me, I'll just drink some water. Now, the opposition, they have taken exception to this. The opposition consisting of a Progressive Party of Maldives, or PPM, which is affiliated with the preceding administration of Yamin Abdul Gayoom. They have characterized this administration as far too reliant on India. And they also claim that this government is amenable to an Indian military presence here. And as points of contention, they point to a dockyard that we're building with India and Uttru and the fact that India has now gifted us Dornier aircraft, which are operated by Indian personnel with with all customary diplomatic immunity, and this has really spilled over in an ugly way. So, for instance, Yamin, he was actually convicted on graft charges in 2019. He was briefly released in 2022. November, and he planned a comeback via an India Out campaign. The premise being that India is jeopardizing the Maldives sovereignty because of its military presence, and that it's imperative that we reverse that. And like perhaps one of the ugliest ways that this manifested was during a yoga day celebration in November 2022. It's when the Indian embassy, they organized a yoga day event at our national football stadium, which was really assaulted by flag waving mobs, and these flags were in fact distributed at PPM headquarters. So despite the supposed religious overtones of it, people they were claiming that yoga was contrary to the Muslim sensibilities of the Maldives. It was really an exercise designed to embarrass India. So because our domestic factions are so aligned with India on the one hand and China on the other, it creates an Indo-Pacific dimension to our politics. And it's worth being frank. India's engagement with the Maldives it's not necessarily driven just by altruism. Part of the aim is to consolidate a partnership with a country that is within its natural sphere of influence, and to prevent China from regaining the kind of strong foothold that they had in the Maldives under the Amin administration. And the Maldives strategic profile has not gone unnoticed by other countries that have come to embrace the Indo-Pacific concept as well. For instance, the United States recently opened their embassy in the Maldives. And this was the opening of their embassy. The precursor to that was that this had actually been announced by a visit by then Secretary of State Michael Pompeo. He was part of a wider Indian Ocean tour where he was advocating that these small island states in the Indian Ocean, they exercise more caution in their commercial dealings with China, and he emphasized the dangers of China's debt trap. It's also worth pointing out that Japan has long had an embassy in the Maldives. Australia will soon open an embassy in the Maldives. So what this means is that the entire Quad, the quadrilateral alliance consisting of Japan, India, Australia, and the United States, which has really it's fairly vague what the Quad is about beyond a preoccupation with containing China. But the point being that they will soon all of them will have a resident diplomatic relations in the Maldives, and maybe creating pressure in terms of our flexibility in dealing with China. It's also worth considering the upcoming 2023 elections that they're going to be held in September of this year. And this would seemingly put Maldives India ties in potential jeopardy just because of how things have been under previous administrations. And the fact that this administration is it's actually going through a fairly embattled and fractured period, perhaps paving the way for a Yamin or PPM comeback. We were actually heading into a very unpredictable election cycle because the MDP is currently fractured between Ibrahim Salihu and Mohammed Nasheed, who's currently our Speaker of Parliament. There's a range of reasons for this, but the point being that it really jeopardizes the coherence of the MDP going into the general elections and in September this year. So Nasheed has long been adamant about changing the Maldives constitution to a parliamentary system more akin to India or the Westminster system in the UK, with the goal of becoming prime minister. And also there's lingering tensions because essentially for a lot of people, Salih was very much a substitute candidate for Nasheed. So I don't think Nasheed really expected at this point for Salih to continue to want to serve on in a head of government capacity. Be that as it may, Salih, he managed to comfortably win the primaries held in January, but that does not mean that the two have reconciled. In addition to that, in September 2018, in September 2018, Salihu had been very much elected to power on the momentum of a coalition rallying around him in opposition to Yamin. That coalition itself is also now fractured. For instance, the biggest member of that coalition, the Jumhuri Party, which is led by Ibrahim Qasim, is a local businessman, a tycoon. He has left Salihu's coalition and he wants to contest independently, and exacerbating the situation is that Nasheed has essentially committed to work with Qasim in the upcoming elections. So with this volatile political situation, there's no real guarantee that an MDP government can stay in power come 2023, September. Yet all is not well for Yamin either. Yamin has once again been convicted of money laundering charges, and he's currently serving an 11-year jail sentence. And it's not really clear if he'll be able to viably contest the elections. Nonetheless, if he does regain power, just extrapolating from the experience of his first term, there is danger that India-Maldives relations will not be as amicable as it is now. And Nasheed, he's not really in the running to be president anymore because he didn't manage to secure the ticket. But nonetheless, if he, for instance, if he is part of a Qasim, if he's a major influence in a Qasim-led government, it's worth pointing out that Nasheed is one of the most locally anti-China politicians in the country, whereas Salihu, despite his initial pledges to maybe give a more critical approach to commercial dealings with China, he now opts for a more balanced approach. China is he does not characterize himself as an anti-China leader in the same way that Nasheed does. Having presented that narrative, I'd also like to point out that there's a danger of oversimplifying things. As I said before, whenever Maldivian politicians are confronted with poor performance at the ballot box, they tend to there's recourse to demagoguery and nationalism, maybe just to gain political momentum in a cynical way. But even if you look back at Yamin's administration, things aren't as clear cut as this narrative would suggest. So, for instance, Yamin, who's very often presented as the quintessential pro-Chinese Maldivian politicians, he as I mentioned, he nominally maintained an India first foreign policy, and he also had no qualms about turning to India for assistance to rectify the situation when the Maldives was confronted with the water crisis in 2014. And he, during a visit to India in 2017, he actually made it a point to condemn some of the articles that had been proliferating in the Maldives, some of the rhetoric that had been proliferating in the Maldives that painted India in a negative light. And as I mentioned, Solihu, he does not characterize himself as an anti-China politician. He maintains a fairly balanced approach. For instance, China is currently involved in several infrastructure projects in the country, including upgrading Valana International Airport. They renovated our foreign ministry. They're involved in a lot of social housing projects. And we recently handed over a few projects that India was handling to China because the Indian government wouldn't finance those projects. Sorry, my memory fails me. I can't actually recall what they were. So even having presented this narrative that there's this pro-China faction in the Maldives, and then there's this pro-India faction in the Maldives, things aren't as clear cut as they would be from just surface level analysis. And it's important to highlight that a zero-sum dichotomy where the Maldives has to be forced to choose between India and China, it's not sustainable. So if we look at India, it's our most proximate neighbor. It's our largest neighbor, and like it's a geopolitical reality that we need to factor in. And it probably a factor that Yamin will factor in if he comes back to power, if he somehow manages to successfully appeal his current conviction, or alternately, if another PPM figure takes the reign of government this year. Similarly, China is, I mean, they're the world's second largest economy, and the Maldives is a country with a lot of infrastructural needs. We're an archipelago. Our islands and therefore our communities they're highly dispersed. So there's not a lot of connectivity, and also this is also being exacerbated by decades of over-centralization in the Mali region. So there's not really much economies of scale in other atolls, and so we need financing to be able to rectify and ameliorate these and overcome these challenges. And we are also a country that has difficulty accessing finances, because like a lot of SIDS, we're actually not characterized as we're not formally deemed a least developed, we're not deemed an LDC. We graduated in 2011, so we don't have access to concessional financing just by virtue of being a less developed country. And so like we need to turn to sources of funding to whoever is willing to provide us that funding. Be that, having said that, we also need to be careful with the kind of debt situations that we get into. It's so like there's a lot of conversation about the Chinese debt trap. Like there's one thing that narrative fails to capture. It's also a lot of economic mismanagement on the part of our governments. To be frank, for instance, China was not the source of Sri Lanka's domestic woes. China had already been borrowing irresponsibly before China really invested in Hambantota port, and their current unhappy situation was caused very much by decisions made by the Rajapaksa administration. Similarly, our debt to China is very much it's not so much China playing a calculated role to lure us into these debt traps. It was essentially because a lot of senior figures in Maldives government opted to use China as vehicle to launder money. So there's an agency there that needs to be maybe more comprehensively commented upon. So just for those reasons, you can't really reduce our entire the conversation about India Maldives bilateral relations just into this Sino-Indian rivalry, or just this Indo-Pacific context. It really needs to be grounded in more in a more sensitive and realistic assessment of each other's ground realities and interests and context. And there's room for that. So, for instance, the Maldives is it's not just a small island state. It's also a big ocean state, as a lot of our politicians like to say. We have like a lot of our national territory is water, and being as we are in the North Indian Ocean, we really factor into India's need for maritime domain awareness. It's an area that we need to be able to cooperate on. Similar, there's a lot of coastal communities in India that rely on fishing just as much as the Maldives does, and there's certainly a scope to cooperate on combating ills such as illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. And there's also the need to address the climate dimension as well. It's perhaps one of the most important dimensions to the Maldives, because we're one of the lowest lying countries on Earth. Our highest elevation is less than 2 meters above sea level. As temperatures increase, as sea levels rise, that really poses an existential threat to us. So, like you have all these Indo-Pacific states competing. You have Australia, India, China. They can take it for granted that that they will viably exist as states in the next 50 to 100 years. Like the Maldives cannot take that for granted. So while we certainly appreciate the interest that the Maldives' new strategic profile brings to us, in the sense that there's a lot of rich Indo-Pacific powers that are interested in having an economic presence in the Maldives and engaging with us and leveraging partnerships for mutual benefit. There's also the risk that everything is just going to be subsumed into a great power rivalry, and that we're going to be forced into a zero-sum competition where we either have to choose entirely between India or we have to completely bandwagon with China, and that's not a sustainable way of looking at things. So if there's so a few key points. India really needs to ground its bilateral relationships with the Maldives and an understanding of our specific priorities and on areas in which we can mutually cooperate beyond great power rivalry. And they also need to be alive to the possibility that campaign rhetoric is not really an indication of where the new administration would want things to stand. I wouldn't insult anybody's intelligence by saying that a return to a Yamin administration would not complicate Maldives ties with the India, but it's also worth pointing out that these are all it's late. It's also worth pointing out that no politician in the Maldives will ever forget the fact that India is our largest neighbor, that they're our most proximate partner, and that the Maldives sovereignty is more jeopardized by not engaging with India, just in the sense that we won't have access to the kind of resources that will allow us to sustain and enrich and commercially prosper our population without India's assistance. And on the Maldives side, I would perhaps I would perhaps acknowledge that there's a need for more a responsible understanding of what domestic politics and what heated rhetoric can entail for broader relations. But I just want to end on the note that subsuming everything into great power competition it's not productive. And I realize that I'm actually running low for time right now, so perhaps I will truncate my remarks and I'll hand over the floor to Monish.
Thank you so much. It was a very comprehensive presentation, but of course, the one thing that I sort of, take a sort of a takeaway from your presentation is your point and argument that we could do much better than being this, superimposed with the geopolitics of the great power rivalry. I think that gives us a lot of food for thought, in terms of like, how do we actually do that, right? And I hope I'm audible to you.
Yes.
So the point about how do we actually do that, to like subtract the bilateral relationship and focus on the positives of the relationship by kind of trying to subtract ourselves from the superimposition of the geopolitics. And then you have a lot of literature coming up recently about the agency of the smaller states in South Asia, uh, to sort of like look at how states like Sri Lanka or Maldives can hedge their bets between India and China and not fall into the zero sum game, and perhaps in that process leverage using leverage increase in behavior for, of course, national interest benefits. Um, while I wait for some of my colleagues to raise questions and students to raise questions, and we are running a little bit short of time, so perhaps we can use the next 10 or 15 minutes for that. I'll just start by asking you one thing, and then I'll open up the floor. It's a very sort of like a straightforward question that from Malay's perspective, and from the kind of I think discussion that goes on in Maldives strategic and political policy community, what would be your thought on what can New Delhi do better? How can New Delhi do better from Malay's perspective? What is the deficit according to you, and how can we do better? Perhaps you can answer that question while I wait for my colleagues and students to raise other questions. Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's actually it's a more difficult question than you would think, because under this administration, like Delhi has actually been fairly proactive. For a long time, Indian foreign policy was characterized as very, very cautious, and perhaps like its policy of non-alignment was very unfairly disparaged, and its engagement with the South Asian region itself, its own neighborhood, was not seen as particularly proactive. But like India has actually rectified a lot of those steps. So like I said, there's a lot of ongoing commercial cooperation. There's a lot of infrastructural development. But perhaps the one thing that they could do better is that India is I'm trying to avoid saying anything too sensitive. Perhaps they're a bit pushy when it comes to certain elements, and it's pushy to the point where it can somehow be counterproductive. For instance, India was like the India Out campaign. It's banned by it was banned by an executive order, and it was subsequently banned through legislation. So it's actually not allowed right now. I think there was I don't actually have I can't necessarily prove this, but there was a lot of like just from hearsay, there's a lot of pressure on the Maldives government to take a more proactive stance against India through legislative means, and it created the problem that it's technically not constitutional. Like it is an infringement on free speech, because foreign policy really comes under the remit of democratic discussion, and there wasn't really much in the way of a communication strategy that countered a lot of these military associated narratives against India, that they're supposedly building that the dockyard in Uttaratul Fushi is a military base, or the fact that India has a contingent of personnel, Indian National Station, to operate the Dornier aircraft. There were ways in which these issues could have been addressed, perhaps more comprehensively, more sensitively, through a communications campaign that they could have collaborated with on our government to maybe frame India's engagement in a more positive light. What I think pressing for proactively ending through legislation a political campaign, it creates scope for backlash, and I think that could have been better handled.
Thank you, Mimir. Any of my colleagues? We have
Hi, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this nice explanations and this kind of presentation, because talking about politics and diplomacy and being so honest and transparent, actually it's in itself achievement. So thank you so much for this presentation. Yes, to run any kind of foreign policy is quite a difficult amidst among available choices. But to my mind, largely India and Maldives, they are in a resonance. So we are very much confident about our bilateral relationship. Just one thing I need to know, because knowing about a country from literature and knowing about a country from that country person, it's quite a different actual experience. So I need to know just one thing. What is the scenario of media in your country? Because lately I'm reading so many stuff, and there's some kind of debate is going on that regime or government is not very much okay with the kind of media is representing some kind of pressure. What is the real scenario? I need to know, actually. Thank you so much.
If I could, sorry, if I could just get some clarification on your question. Are you asking if there's limited space for media, or are you
Yeah,
asking?
exactly. I'm asking, is there any kind of problem for media or something is quite complexity or something? You can share some inputs.
Well, there was a fairly controversial amendment to our Evidence Act recently. So the basic premise behind it is that under very certain limited circumstances that have to do with national security, media can be compelled to disclose their sources. I admit I'm not a lawyer. I've spoke to a few lawyers in the Maldives regarding this, and they assure me that these are very limited. It has to be if there is an imminent threat to national security. On that basis, the government can compel them to give up a source, and I think they have to issue that through the courts as well. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But I can't speak to the legal niceties of that point. Though it is worth pointing out that this government's engagement with the media, and I speak very frankly as someone who worked in the communications section of the president's office, is perhaps not always been as robust as it could have been. And there's also a lot of financial pressure on media to report things that are that present the government in a positive light. And it is concerning. It's one of the reasons I actually left the administration. But to be fair, to make a point of comparison, things certainly are not as bad under this government as they were under the previous government. I know it's not it is sort of a cop out to say that they're not as bad as the previous government, but you also have to understand under the previous government, two journalists were murdered, one by Islamist extremists, the other by a combination. And the government also had issued a defamation act, not this administration, the previous administration, that essentially fined media heavy amounts for reporting anything critical of the government. And it was one of the pledges of this government to restore those freedoms. They did repeal the Media Act, and there is a freer space for media right now than there had been previously. But certainly there are areas that are in need of improvement. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimra. Any last minute questions from any of the students before we try and close the session? Because I know, it's been a long day for Mimra, and I don't want to extend it any further. All right. So if the students have obviously the kind of presentation that you have made. Both the faculty and me, while entering to the classes, will have to face the music after you are gone. So we are volunteered for that. We are ready for that. That's not an issue at all. But having said all of that, on behalf of Professor Nagalakshmi Raman, the head and director of the Amity Institute of International Studies, and all my colleagues who are present here, and all my students, it's been a fascinating experience listening. You've been in the government, so it's safe to say that we are hearing from the horse's mouth. So I think that's it just adds up more layers to what we are really trying to do here, and attempt that we are at least making in terms of understanding the complexity of our neighborhood, the neighborhood that we share. And we have a lot of commonalities and a lot of prospects for common growth, but not to really dispel the challenges that we have in front of us as a neighborhood. And I think in our own small, humble ways, we are trying to build some kind of a perspective, as I said, from the neighborhood eyes. And I think your presentation has added more layers to that complexity of understanding. And we are grateful for that. Thank you so much, Mimra. And we will get back to you once we are done with the report, so that we can hash it out before we even plan to release it. And of course, the presentation and the discussion is being done under Chatham House rules. So, you will not be caught in any way. So thank you so much, Mimra, and have a good night. I owe you of coffee when we meet in DC or New Delhi, wherever in the world. Right. Thank you so much.
Before I sign off, I just like to ask: are you planning on visiting DC anytime soon?
I have something scheduled in the Bay Area in West Coast, but if possible, I will take a detour to Northeast.
Okay, please let me know if you're in town.
Sure, ma'am. Okay. Have a good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you so much for to Amity University for this, and thank you for listening. I must admit, I'm an early sleeper, so I hope I manage to put my best foot forward. But thank you.
Thank you.